Before we start the talk, let me say a few words about the meeting procedure, because a few people have indicated to me that it is rather vague to them how this meeting procedure takes place, and it is kind of vague. We're starting something different this retreat, so none of us are used to it, and it's also a relatively small retreat. Usually we ask people to sit downstairs in the solarium, which is the lowest floor here as one comes out of the sitting room. And that helps me to know who wants to go to a meeting. But sometimes it gets very hot, or maybe somebody would prefer to sit in the balcony. But it would be helpful if the person indicated somehow or other, when sitting in the balcony, that he or she would like to have a meeting. I may be in the dining room walking, so as I come back into the balcony and you would like to have a meeting, would you please go downstairs? Or if I'm coming up out of the meeting room to take a break, at that time or later when I come back, please indicate somehow that you are interested in a meeting. We have left the doors open until now of the meeting room, but sometimes this has meant that I need to go downstairs to see whether someone is sitting in there, and that makes unnecessary commotion for me to go down and back up. Also, if we keep the room air conditioned in hot weather, I will have to close the doors. So either you're sitting down in the solarium or getting up as I come back in will indicate your interest in a meeting. Let me say again, there is no requirement at all to go to meetings. One person said, I haven't had a question, that's why I didn't come to a meeting. If you're interested to come to a meeting, you can come without a question. We can sit there, listen to the birds, or the chainsaw, the traffic, or whatever, and maybe a question will come up for either one of us. You don't have to come prepared, and this meeting situation is not a testing situation, which you may be used to from other places. We're meeting as friends, interested in the same thing. I'll read some further questions. I'm aware that we have not discussed all of the previous ones, and later in the retreat I may just go and comb through what has been left over, and also people themselves say, you didn't talk about this yet, which is always helpful if there's some indication what people would really like to look into in depth. I find myself making all kinds of resolutions for when I get home, to have more quiet time, to be more attentive and present in my daily work. And yet I know very well that when I get back home, I'll probably be back into the same rut of habits and inattention very soon. Also, I do not want to exert willpower anymore, as I used to do, to make myself sit or make myself be attentive, or to try to become a spiritual person, to strive to be better, and so forth. In listening to your talk this morning, it sounds as though you are positing a me which I have to accept as existing. Maybe I'm just taking this over from you and other talks and books, that there is a me, a self, before having found out about it myself. Also, in listening to your talk, it somehow sounds as though it is bad to have a me, and then I easily fall into the judgment, just myself, judging myself bad for having a me. Can one live with insecurity? the insecurity of not knowing. What if, for almost all your life, an image has been projected upon you? What you are and what you know you're not. Yet the projection of this image sticks, and you feel yourself caught up in it. Doesn't that have to get resolved? I hear you say that we should live as a non-entity. But how do we accomplish that? How can we uproot, as you described, the uprooting of the tree? How can we uproot this ego, the sense of self? Isn't what we're doing here going completely against the conventional stream? Conventionally, we always expect to be admonished or blamed for something bad in us, or for something bad we've done. And we expect to be encouraged and praised when we do good. It's so radically different and hard to grasp that all that needs to be done is to clearly see what is going on. Why is it so difficult to see this simple thing? Can you say some more about the connection between thoughts and deep emotion? What if you don't see the thought that may have caused the emotion that you're now feeling? And could there be emotion and pain without thought having triggered it? It is not just that I feel sorry for myself without friends who understand what I'm doing and the work that I'm doing. But it causes a great deal of pain to see people causing themselves and each other misery without seeing how and why this is happening, and without being able to help them see it. That last comment went along with what I felt after the talk, that I hadn't gotten to that aspect yet. Remember, we were talking about feeling isolated in doing this work from others who don't want to share it, who are not interested. Resist it maybe, to talk about it, or withdraw when it's brought up. Or may even indicate that I'm strange for doing it. But this aspect we didn't get to. That there may be a real pain in seeing someone do something which is so clearly hurtful to themselves and others, or to our relationship, and not be able to talk about it, look at it in depth. In depth meaning not just superficially talk about it, but wonder, why do we do this? And not just, why do you do this? I could give you a lot of good advice, but why are we doing this? There's really no deeper joy than being able to do this with another person. We may have had irritation between each other, but one can look at it together, not just let that sit as a memory which keeps on working inevitably. But wonder not just, why did you do it, but what happened in myself, and share that like two mirrors reflecting each other. The deep pain that can be felt in seeing ourselves live in ignorance and not wake up to see what is going on, and in the waking up, the possibility for change to happen. change here not meaning I must get better, I must not be bad, I must make resolutions. We don't mean that by change. The change is the waking up, the seeing of what is going on actually, factually. Not with our habitual response, I must do something about it. The seeing is the doing. It may express itself in action or in inaction. We don't know. It depends on what is going on, whether action is appropriate or not. But what is new in a human being is waking up and seeing what one is thinking, doing, how thought triggers emotion. To see that. And to see how almost instantaneous the habitual thought comes up. What should I do about this emotion now? I shouldn't feel emotional. Or I have a right to feel emotional. I must express my emotions. All kind of ideas, assumptions, and theories about ourselves, which prevent being in touch with the raw material, the raw stuff of thinking, emoting, sensing, feeling, reacting, and more thoughts coming out of all of that, and more emotions coming out of more thoughts. And how that affects our relationship with each other and with the trees and birds or people around us, with the work. To become intelligent about this, not by reading books about human nature or human relationship, but reading the book of relationship as it unfolds in our daily life, which takes more than thinking about it. Although thinking about it is part of it. We may be thinking about it now, which means evoking some memory to look at things that happen in ourselves and each other. But it's more than thinking. It's a quiet, spacious opening to what's there, which doesn't have words much in our vocabulary because it doesn't happen very much. Although it has happened to human beings over the centuries. An opening, a waking up to what is, inside and out. And usually an astonishment when this waking up or coming to takes place in depth. It may not at all be accompanied by judgment about the me or selfishness, by amazement, how attached one has been to memory and image and idea, and maybe even a smile or a laughter about how seriously one has taken this edifice of ideas and images imposed upon us by others and imposed by ourselves upon ourselves and others. And the imposer is the ever-active brain, recording, storing. It seems as though forever, but it doesn't have to be forever. But this is how it operates when no insight takes place. Recording, storing what somebody did. And if we don't get together, the sooner the better, and talk about it, the image starts growing in sort of a cancerous way, accumulates more cells of imagery about what you did, what you are, and that I share with other people. And they contribute some more because we always like to make friends against enemies. Gives us a sense of belonging and security and self-righteousness. If you hear this as being said judgmentally, it's not meant so. We're looking at something. It happens in all of us. And as one person said, the way we hear it conventionally is immediately judging when something is said with emphasis as being bad, and then the brain already voluntarily brings up the opposite of what would be good, namely not to be selfish, not to be an entity, to be a non-entity. The brain does constant work in its conditioned, deeply conditioned ways to think in opposites, to think in good and bad. And when bad is mentioned, to project the good as the alternative, as well as feelings of guilt about being bad, which comes from our upbringing. All of us were raised with guilt. Some with more, some with a little bit less, but we've all felt guilty as children. Many, many times over for having hurt mom and dad, having brought about some disaster, being pounded or yelled at or blamed or sent to our room. And these guilt memories and incidents, they linger someplace in the storage house, ready to be triggered when a new hurt starts, which may not be exactly of the same parent-child kind of thing, but it triggers that, and we feel like a child again, blamed, humiliated, and therefore often such a rage coming up. We don't want to be a child anymore, being blamed and humiliated. We didn't talk about that in our hour-long meeting on irritation, that one of the reasons we get irritated when somebody blames us or indicates that we did something wrong or aren't listening or whatever, we are the child now who's being blamed, and now there can be a little bit more of a reaction against it. As children, that was often impossible. Parents were too powerful, or if we did react, we were pounded, hit, transferred into another place. Isn't that one of the reasons for being irritated? When we're criticized, we're still that humiliated, inferior child in the presence of some parental type of criticizer. And all past humiliations reverberate right now in this incident. We're putting it out not for you to believe or take over from this talk, but to test it out when you feel humiliated or enraged at someone criticizing you, or deeply hurt. And then to watch how the hurt is nurtured by going over and over the incident again. In memory, which is possible with this brain, the brain can endlessly project and reproject and replay a scene that happened. And in that replaying, trigger all the emotions that were there. It's the amazing capacity of this organism. A brain with more capacity than what it needs to keep this organism surviving. Most animals just have enough capacity for that, and that's why they seem to live so carefree. We project fear onto a running deer, but I don't know whether a running deer with these graceful jumps is really afraid. It just runs from perceived danger. And when the danger is no longer perceived, it browses again. It's not this great storage area for what happened and the projection area for projecting what can happen. And all the symbolization of what we are, what we could be, or what we're identified with, and the power of the symbol to arouse our fervor, to defend, to fight, to attack. Animals have no symbols, they have no flags. No religious symbols either. Sometimes there is a species that has a sense for things that are glittering. Some animals hoard glittering objects. Wonder whether there's a pleasure in that or how it is sort of programmed into their life. And of course, the ones that are closer to our family, the chimps love to hang things around themselves. Chains or clanky things that make a lot of noise. One could speculate whether they feel more important strutting around with lots of stuff clanking on them. More powerful. Their brain is larger than the normal animal brain. And of course there are the dolphins and the whales who have a language and who sing to each other over great distances. People talk about the poetic songs of whales. I've heard some on recordings. But whales don't have that opposable thumb that human beings have to build themselves armament or tools. They may have the brain for storage, but not the capacity to build and make objects which can be used either for storage or for attack. I'm just making it very simplified. For also self-enhancement. So this capacity is here in this brain, which is not our brain. It is something that has evolved over hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years and manifests in each newborn baby with already many ingrained programs, genetically ingrained or imprinted programs to run, and many new ones to be learned. At a very early age, I think it's said at 2 is the height of learning of the brain, learning capacity. And learning also what other people say we are. Like this one person saying, an image has been imprinted upon me almost as long as I've lived. And I've lived up to that image. I don't want to do that anymore. This has to be resolved. And it's been a burden all my life. What parents or whoever have told me I am and what I've done. Before one gets too intense in saying, what can I do about it? Can one watch it as it manifests? And as there is great urgency inwardly, conditioned urgency to conform to that image or to rebel against the image, to watch it all, the whole thing. The power of the image to mold and influence our behavior from moment to moment, and watch it with a non-engaged clarity. Non-engaged clarity, I mean just to see it without feeling I have to take a stand on this, for or against it. Get rid of it, become something else, adopt another image. It's often a therapeutic process to discard undesirable images and adopt new positive images about oneself. But one is still stuck with an image or images that one now has to conform to and hope that other people will accept them. Other people may not, and one might not always be able to conform to it. And then the whole thing gets shaky and crumbly again. And with that goes great anxiety, or sadness, or rage. To see all of that going on in us, in human beings, not just in me or you, but in all of us. The more you become aware of what goes on in yourself, the more sensitive you become to what goes on in other people. And you can read faces and body language. I don't mean interpret. It doesn't need to be interpreted. It's so obvious. Defensiveness or protectiveness or aggressiveness, hurt, feeling humiliated, feeling guilty, and acting out of that or reacting out of that. Now, am I saying things before one has a chance to test it out? Maybe I am. But you still have the chance to test it out. You don't have to adopt it, that this is so. As a matter of fact, if that's what the brain does, just remember the words and then repeat them in a rote-like fashion to oneself and others. Nothing has been gained or seen or understood. It's only more storage, more knowledge, information gathered. But somebody saying something like this, what we said about hurt or humiliation, clinging to images and so forth, somebody saying or writing something about this may trigger our seeing it for ourselves when it happens in a non-explainable way. There is a connection. I won't say a strictly causal connection. But it's not unrelated to see something and having occupied the mind with it by listening to a talk or hearing or talking in a meeting or wondering about it oneself. We're not positing an ego or a self. There is no such thing as a little entity living inside of us. We are not a separate entity. We are a programmed, conditioned being with a million influences having shaped this body and mind since time immemorial. One of the influences being, maybe that is a more recent one, you are an individual, and the belief in that. We're not positing that there is a me. We're using words to describe a bundle of imagery and memories and reactions, which, if one looks at it inwardly, always keep the idea of myself at the center of the universe. How does this relate to me? What can I get out of it? It's not said judgmentally. We can observe it. It's happening in us. We don't have to buy it. We don't have to reject it. Can we watch it, discover it? And then a marvel takes place, namely that a conditioned mind, okay, or let's rather put it this way, that there can be insight into the conditioned mind, because the conditioned mind itself has no insight. It's only conditioned and perpetuates it with little modifications. Behavior modification through praise and blame. A new conditioning can replace an old one. But insight comes from a different source. I don't know where it comes from. It happens. One person mentioned that to me. I don't recall precise. One person said, as you were talking yesterday, suddenly I saw a program running that I thought you were, when you talked about irritation, I thought you were irritated at me and the question I brought up in the meeting, which was not the case. But the person said, and I could suddenly see that this was a program that was not necessarily true. And with that insight, the program stopped. He said, later came back again. Was she irritated at me? But one can see that too, can't one? We can begin to understand what's going on here. In this dark box, seemingly dark box, it can light up with understanding, and don't say, how do I light it up? That's the wrong question. Are you interested in finding out about yourself? It's not too hard to see when one gets jealous or envious or craves something. It's not so hard to become aware of it. We do become aware of it, but we usually shut it off, or not shut it off, but deny that we could be such ugly things. And the thing then runs unconsciously or subconsciously. And the marvelous thing is, it doesn't matter what it is that is seen, but what matters greatly is that they're seeing. One person once said, after a talk, I saw the speaker talk with another person in a very animated way, and I became jealous, and I noticed it. And it was a marvelous moment in my life. This doesn't make much sense if one hasn't had that experience of seeing something without judgment, just the clarity of something running, which affects our whole organism and our relationship with the person who we're jealous of, as well as the person who causes our jealousy. To see that. And it happens. Why, I don't know. Where from, I don't know. But it does. So coming to the question that was put, I don't always see a thought that triggered the sadness that I feel. And is all sadness triggered by thoughts? And if I don't see them, are they subconscious, unconscious? And that scares me just that much more, that I'm run by things that I can't even see or can't even be aware of. But that's our condition as we start out with this work. Let's face it. We are run and controlled, like one person said, a puppet on a string, by emotions triggered by thought. And do I talk too fast? Give some pauses in between. When I refer to a thought triggering an emotion, I don't exclusively mean a verbal thought, a thought, word, or an idea. It can also be a picture, seeing something that in an unfathomable way reminds this brain of something else that looks similar or was there at the time a sad event happened. Maybe the thing happened right near a telephone pole, and every time a telephone is seen, some queasy feeling arises in the body. The brain has made that association. Not that the telephone pole had anything to do with it, but it was there and recorded in connection with the fear or sadness arousing incident. So it may not be a word, it can be just any kind of memory, verbal or non-verbal, or even organismic. A certain sensation that was present at a time of fear or pain or sadness. When for some reason that sensation arises, it brings with it the associated fear and sadness. But a memory, I'm quite sure, is always involved. Maybe not. I don't want to make a categorical statement. As far as I've been able to investigate, emotions do not come about when the mind is open and not attached to memory. By not attached, I don't mean a voluntary act. It is just disconnected from that whole mode of brain work. That brain work is quiet. Then emotions of fear or anger or irritation don't arise. And you can test that out in such a state by bringing up the remembrance of something that used to anger you or scare you, and just realize that remembrance does not connect with emotions. The connection is severed in a state of attention or awareness, where the memory mind is relatively quiet. It is not completely quiet, because memory has to operate for us to survive and function. But what is important is not to be theoretically conscious or knowledgeable about what triggers what, not to get into the theory of it, but to watch it in oneself. And it is not impossible for anyone to notice that one thought of an anger-arousing incident can bring the body into an angry state. Or one thought about a pleasurable past incident can arouse pleasurable feelings throughout the body. And one thought about something sad that happened to me, or one word or two words, poor me, can arouse tremendous sadness. Which is, by sadness, or when I use these words, I don't just mean the mental content, but physical, organismic, muscular, glandular sensations. And I'm not saying that all sadness is due to self-pity. I don't want to make any categorical statements because they shut out the investigating spirit. Like dousing a little flame with a wet blanket. It's so important that this little flame of inquiry stay alive, to wonder about things, and because one is wondering, maybe things do reveal themselves easier. It's the conclusions we have about everything that veils and conceals what is going on. That's why it's so hard, maybe, because we're so knowledgeable about everything. And if we don't have knowledge, we beg to get explanations. We talked about that yesterday too. Tremendous urge to get an explanation quick, so I can live in some kind of a certainty, which is an illusory certainty that explanation and knowledge conveys to the human mind and therefore body. An illusory certainty. We're sort of at the crossroads of going into either the question of how does one live with sadness, or how does one live with insecurity. I think since the sadness has already come up with several people, we'll go into that right now and leave the insecurity for another time. Sadness wells up. People report that. I feel sort of like a bottomless sadness arise. Or I've lived with sadness, it's never been far away, even when I felt good, one person said. It was but an inch away. We have just talked a lot about watching what triggers the sadness, but so we don't need to go into that again, that a thought or memory, fleeting as it may be, about what I don't have anymore, or what I never had, or what I had and lost, those thoughts can immediately convulse the body in a wanting to cry and sob sadness. What I had, what I lost, or what I never had. That thought can do it. Something it comes to mind too. I don't know whether you've heard about the therapy of primal scream. I read that book once, the original book, and the man who started this therapy, if I remember correctly, either he produced this play or he witnessed it. It was a stage in which a little child ran across the stage, a little child in diapers, I think, crying, "Mommy, Mommy," and people crying. And we know that, don't we? A child in misery looking for his mother. It affects us. Deeply, because we also are that child that is in vain looking for his mother or her mother he never had or doesn't have anymore, or lost. So that is the connection with memory, pictures and words, sounds, images. But let us say one hasn't seen a connection, and maybe for all one knows there was none, is only feeling this bottomless sadness. How does one live with it? Is there any choice? Somebody mentioned to me that after last retreat, somebody said, in this practice that people are doing here, you can never get in touch with an emotion. There will always be a veil between you and the emotion. I wasn't there, but I wondered about what that person meant. What is the veil? What is there to be in between? There's only sadness. There's no one who has it. Oneself is all of that at this moment. Can it be like that? Unconditionally there be this state which one will not even name anymore, not label it any longer, but just a wondering about it, all of oneself, one big question mark of wondering sadness. But not the word, not the idea, the concept, but what's actually happening right now. What is it? And then quiet, not wanting to do something about it, not wanting to push it away, get rid of it, change it into happiness. That's the vision, that's separation, that's the veil. Just what is. What is that? Noticing all the hemming in that the body habitually has done and learned to not feel that thing. And if one notices the habitual tensions against fear or sadness or pain, then can they relax? Because it's all right to feel this thing. It doesn't have to be hemmed in by tension or bracing, squishing or blocking. They're all learned habits which have to come into awareness before they can let up and wither away, so that there's only what's left without the block, without the bracing. What is that? We have to find out, don't we? Live with it in a non-violent way. Live with it sounds dualistic, but there's no dualism in that. There's only what's there, and I don't know what it is. It's not that I say I have that. That's already talking about it and moving away from it. And with the ending of some of these narrowing habits of blocking it in, keeping it under control, with noticing these habits and wondering whether they have to continue. One starts to wonder whether a habit that has just been discovered has to continue. It lets up. That's the marvel. It doesn't have to continue. If there's really interest in finding out and feeling completely, unconditionally what this is, the sadness, fear, pain, anger, allowing that to do its thing, burn or pain or whatever, and not shutting out the bird, the twittering, the warm or cool air, the breathing and heartbeat. It's all there. It's one palpitating whole. These are words, but it's also true. It's like when you would go to a very sick friend, maybe he or she is dying, and you sense, he or she doesn't want to talk about things. Just wants somebody to be there. So you're just there, maybe hold his or her hand. You're there, unconditionally, not for your satisfaction. Maybe that started out, I'm good if I see a sick friend, but in being there, there's no room for that. Just open. There's just this friend, whatever condition she's in, you don't know. And everything else, including your own beating heart, that's also there. It's not separate. The breath you breathe is not separate from the breathing of the friend. It's all one whole ongoing thing. Unless thought comes in and divides it all up. That's what thought does. This is me, this is you, this is my breath, this is your breath. And with that, the universe becomes divided up. But in intensely listening to what's there without knowing what it is, not taking refuge in knowledge, where is the division? We will end here for today.